The day I graduated from medical school, my father sent me a text that said, "Proud of you, kiddo." I saved that message for 3 years. I read it sometimes when things got hard, when the residency hours were brutal, when I cried in a hospital bathroom at 2 in the morning because I'd lost a patient and had nobody to call. That text was the closest thing I had to a lifeline from my family. I deleted it the morning after my wedding, when my mother sent me a Venmo request for $4,200. The subject line said, "Reimbursement for travel hotel outfits." I stared at it for a long time. My husband was asleep next to me. We were still in the hotel room we'd booked for our wedding night. The same hotel where, the evening before, my parents and my brother had sat in the third row and stared at me like I was a stranger performing a play they hadn't agreed to watch. They left before the cake was cut. My mother hugged me exactly once, fast and loose, the way you hug someone you just met at a work event. My father shook my husband's hand. My brother didn't speak to me at all. They were gone by 7:30. The DJ was still playing. My friends were dancing. My new mother-in-law had her shoes off and was laughing so loud I could hear her from across the room. My family got in their rental car and drove back to the hotel. And I found out later they checked out that same night and flew home early. I didn't know any of that until the next morning. I had spent the rest of my wedding reception smiling so hard my face hurt, telling people they must have had an early flight. Yes, it's a long trip. No, really, it's fine. They're so proud. They really are. I want to back up, because this didn't come out of nowhere. It never does with families like mine. And I think you need to understand what it took to get to that hotel room, to that Venmo request, before you can understand what I did next. I'm the oldest of 3. My brother is 2 years younger than me. My sister is 6 years younger. I was the one who got good grades, who never caused trouble, who my mother used to call the responsible one, with a kind of exhaustion in her voice that made it sound less like a compliment and more like a burden she was describing. I was responsible so she didn't have to be. I was responsible so my father could focus on my brother's baseball career and my sister's anxiety and whatever was happening with the house, the finances, the endless low hum of stress that lived in our kitchen. When I got into medical school, my mother cried, not the good kind. She sat at the kitchen table and said, "I just don't understand why you have to go so far away." The school was in another state. It was 4 hours by car. She said it like I was moving to another continent. I drove those 4 hours a lot in the beginning. I came home for holidays. I called every Sunday. I sent cards. I tried. What I got back was a specific kind of nothing that's hard to explain to people who haven't experienced it. Not hostility, not cruelty, just absence. A low-grade withdrawal of warmth that I could never quite pin down because whenever I tried to name it, my mother would look at me with this patient expression and say, "I don't know what you want from me." And I would feel crazy. I would feel like the problem was me, my expectations, my neediness. My father was more direct. He had opinions about how long medical training takes, about the debt, about the fact that I was 31 and not yet married. And then later, when I started dating my husband, about the fact that he wasn't from the same background as us, didn't go to the right kind of school, worked in trades. "He seems like a good guy," my father said once, with a pause that did a lot of work. "I just want more for you." My husband is one of the most competent, decent, hardworking people I have ever met. He owns a contracting business. He built the deck behind our house with his own hands. He has never once made me feel like a burden. I would take 100 of him over one version of my father. We got engaged in the fall. I told my parents on a Sunday call. There was a pause. My mother said, "Well, let us know what you need." That was it. No congratulations. No excitement. My father asked when we were thinking of having kids. I told myself it would get better once they met him properly. I told myself the wedding would change things. I planned the whole thing mostly alone. My mother came to one venue tour and spent the entire time on her phone. She declined to come dress shopping because of a prior commitment that later turned out to be a neighbor's birthday lunch. I found out because I saw a photo on Facebook. I'm not going to pretend I didn't feel these things. I felt them. I cried about them. I talked to my therapist about them every other week for 2 years. I learned words like emotional unavailability and conditional regard, and I applied them neatly to my parents and then went home for Christmas anyway, because that's what you do. You keep going back. You keep trying. You keep believing that one day something will shift. The wedding was in June. We did it right. A real venue, 120 guests. Flowers I agonized over. A caterer my husband and I taste tested 3 times. I wore a dress I loved. I was happy that day, genuinely happy, the kind that lives in your chest and makes everything look a little brighter. My parents sat in the 3rd row. Not the front, the 3rd. My mother's had decided apparently that the front row was too close to the aisle. My brother sat with them. My sister couldn't come. She was in the middle of a health crisis that I completely understood and held no resentment about. It was my parents and my brother in a row, and then the row in front of them and the row in front of that empty. We'd reserved those rows. They just didn't sit in them. The ceremony was 40 minutes. My father looked at his watch twice. I didn't see it directly. My maid of honor told me afterward gently, "The way you tell someone something you wish you didn't have to say." And then they left. And I spent the rest of the night pretending they hadn't. The morning after, I opened Venmo to the request. Reimbursement for travel, her hotel, outfits. I put my phone down. I picked it up again. I read it again in case I'd misunderstood. I hadn't. My husband was still asleep. I got up and stood at the window and looked at the parking lot of our wedding hotel, and I thought about every Sunday call, every 4-hour drive, every Christmas I'd shown up and tried and been met with that careful, studied nothing. I thought about the dress I'd bought alone. I thought about the empty rows. I thought, I am a doctor. I have 6 figures of student loan debt, and I am standing here in my wedding hotel the morning after my wedding, and my mother just sent me a bill. I went back to the bed and sat down. My husband woke up. I showed him the phone. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at me. He said, "What do you want to do?" And I realized sitting there that nobody in my family had ever asked me that. I thought about it for 2 days. I didn't respond to the Venmo request. I didn't call. I went back to work. I was in my 2nd year of attending, pulling long shifts, and I let the request sit there and I thought about every version of what I could say. I could write a long message. I had drafted about 9 of them in my head over the years. Long, careful, specific messages laying out every instance and pattern and feeling, documented and articulate. I never sent them because I knew exactly what would happen. My mother would cry. My father would get quiet. My brother would text me later saying I was being dramatic. And then nothing would change. I'd just have created an episode that everyone would reference for years as evidence of my sensitivity. I didn't want to write another letter. On the 3rd day, I opened Venmo. I accepted 0.01 cents of the request, the minimum the app would allow, 1 cent. And in the note I wrote, "Best wishes on your travels home." Then I archived the conversation, turned off notifications for both their numbers, and went to make coffee. I won't tell you it felt like fireworks. It felt quiet. Quietly correct, the way closing a door feels when you've been standing in a draft for too long. For about 6 weeks, I heard nothing. No calls returned because I hadn't called. No messages beyond a few texts from my mother that I left unread. "Haven't heard from you. Hope you're well. Let me know you're okay." Standard. The kind of texts that sound like concern but function as maintenance, making sure the connection is still there to draw on when needed. I was learning slowly what it felt like to not be waiting. I used to walk around with this low-level alertness like a fire alarm's on standby, always half-braced, always monitoring. Had I called enough? Was someone upset? Was the next conversation going to be the one where something finally broke? I hadn't realized how much energy that took until it started to quiet down. Then my father called my husband. I didn't know at first. My husband mentioned it that evening, carefully, watching my face. He said my father had called him directly, asked if things were okay, said he was worried about me, asked if there was something he'd done. My husband had said, "You should talk to your daughter." My father hadn't called me. He called my husband 2 more times over the following weeks. Then he called my hospital and asked for me by name at the front desk. The person who answered told him I wasn't available and asked if he'd like to leave a message. He didn't leave one. He called back the next day and did the same thing. I found out when a colleague mentioned it to me in the hall. "Someone's been calling asking for you. We think it's a family member?" With that careful tone people use when they're not sure if they're delivering good news or bad. I filed an incident report with hospital administration. This wasn't me overreacting. This was me, a physician, taking appropriate steps when a person was attempting to contact me through my workplace after being asked not to. My department head was kind about it. She said, "These things happen. We'll flag it." What I didn't anticipate was that my father had also been talking to my brother, and my brother had apparently told my father where my husband and I had recently moved. It was a Saturday morning, 8 weeks after the wedding. I was on my second cup of coffee, sitting at the kitchen table with case notes spread in front of me. My husband was out. I heard a knock. I opened the door, and my father was standing on my front porch with 2 police officers. I want to be precise here, because the details matter. He had told them I was mentally unwell and possibly a danger to myself, that I had cut off all contact with family, that I was acting erratically, that he was concerned for my welfare. He had filed what's called a wellness check request. In most states, anyone can do this. You don't need to prove anything. You just express concern and officers are dispatched. So there were 2 officers on my porch, professional and not unkind, and my father standing slightly behind them with an expression I can only describe as vindicated. I felt something go very still inside me. The officers explained why they were there. They asked if they could come in, and I said yes, calmly, because I am a physician and I understand how these situations work, and I also knew that my clearest path through this moment was to be exactly as composed as I actually felt. I showed them my hospital ID. I explained that I was on staff at the regional medical center, that I had been working regular shifts, that I was in no distress. I offered to provide my department head's contact information. One of the officers asked if I had been in contact with my family recently. I said I had chosen to take some space and that this decision had been my own and was not an indication of any crisis. My father, from the doorway, said, "She's not herself. She's been acting strange and since the wedding." One of the officers looked at him, then looked at me, then back at him. I said quietly, "My father arrived at my home without invitation. I did not give him this address." There was a pause. The officers completed their check. They determined, as any reasonable person could see, that I was safe, composed, and not in any danger. Before they left, one of them said to my father, in a very level tone, that filing a wellness check with inaccurate information could have consequences, and that showing up uninvited to a person's home after they had indicated they needed space was something he might want to reconsider. My father stood on my porch and looked at me. I think he expected me to say something, to open a door literally or otherwise. I thanked the officers. I stepped back inside. I closed the door. I stood in my hallway for a moment. Then I called my husband. Then I called a lawyer, a friend from residency who practices family law, who walked me through my options, which included a formal no-contact letter, documentation of the workplace contact, and a note on file about the wellness check. That afternoon, we sent a letter, legal, formal, brief. It said that I had made a deliberate choice to limit contact, that any further attempts to reach me through my workplace or through law enforcement under false pretenses would be treated as harassment, and that I wished my family well but required them to respect my decision. I don't know exactly what my father thought would happen when he stood on my porch with those officers. Maybe he thought I would break down. Maybe he thought I would see him there and feel the old pull, the one that had kept me making those 4-hour drives, writing those Sunday calls, showing up and trying and trying and trying. Maybe he thought the uniform would remind me that he still had some authority over my life, that there were still people I had to answer to when he decided I was out of line. What he didn't understand, what I'm not sure he's capable of understanding, is that I had already gone through the hard part. The hard part wasn't closing the door that Saturday. The hard part was every year before it. Every time I kept it open when I should have known better. Every time I drove 4 hours to sit at a table where no one asked me a single question about my life. By the time he stood on my porch, I had already grieved most of it. Grief for a living parent is a specific thing. People don't always recognize it. They say, but your parents are still alive, and they mean it as comfort. And you have to find a way to explain that sometimes the loss isn't the person dying. It's the relationship that was never really there. The version of them you spent decades waiting to meet. At some point, you stop waiting. Not because you gave up, but because the waiting was costing you too much. I'm not going to tell you things are completely resolved, because they're not. My brother sends a text on my birthday. My mother sends Christmas cards addressed to both of us, with a short note inside that says nothing and something at the same time. I read them. I don't respond. I keep them in a box. I'm not sure why, whether I'll want them someday or whether I'm just not ready to throw them away. What I can tell you is what has changed. I sleep through the night now. That sounds like a small thing. It isn't. For years, I woke up somewhere around 3 in the morning with this ambient dread, that familiar low-grade sense of something unfinished, something owed, some conversation I needed to have. I used to lie there cataloging it. Had I called enough? Had I tried enough? Was the next family event going to be the one that finally went right? I don't do that anymore. My husband says I laugh differently now. I didn't know what he meant at first, but I think I do now. There was always a slight bracing in me, even in happy moments, like I was waiting for the other shoe. Like joy was something I needed to manage carefully, not take too much of, in case someone needed me to be smaller. I'm working on that. Therapy helps. My mother-in-law helps. She is unambiguously delighted by me in a way I still find slightly startling, like a bright light you have to adjust to. She calls on Sundays. She asks about my patients without asking for names. Just how was your week? What was hard? What went well? She sent me a card for my first anniversary that said she was proud to call me her daughter. I kept that one too, but not in the box. Last month, I made the last payment on a piece of my student loan debt, a small chunk, but mine. I took myself and my husband to dinner at a place we'd been wanting to try, and I sat across from him and thought about what it had taken to get here. Not just the loan, all of it. Every year of training, every call, every door I'd kept open past the point it made any sense. And finally, the years of learning to close them. My father thought sending police to my door would reopen something. What he didn't know, what I had only recently learned myself, is that there was nothing left to reopen. Not because I hate him. Not because I'm bitter, though I've been both of those things at various points, and I won't pretend otherwise. But because I finally understood something that took me a long time to get. You cannot keep giving someone the opportunity to disappoint you and call it hope. At some point, hope becomes a habit that hurts you. And letting go of it, really letting go, not just saying you have, is not a failure. It's the beginning of something else entirely.